Hi everyone. I've got the unenviable task of giving the last talk of the day. I think the 10th AI talk today, but hopefully I can get someone to shout bingo by the end. Um, this talk is kind of similar to the other Agentic AI talks, but we're going to focus on a particular tool that we've been building within Strat7. We'll focus more on the learnings and how do we take these tools to the next level by including confidence scoring, which I'll come to at the end. And I think that's something which hasn't been kind of explored enough in the industry. I'm Hasdeep. Been at Strat7 for just over 4 years, and I'm AI lead, working closely with Andrew, Maria, and others in the Strat7 group. Earlier this year, we formed an innovation lab team. We have a team of developers, and we're helping to basically build tools for market researchers in Strat7. So there's about 300 plus researchers in the group. So we're very much an internal facing team. We're not really focusing so much on building tools for clients. So we're trying to maximize productivity for researchers. So we've heard a lot about agentic AI, so I'm going to kind of skip over the next couple of slides briefly, but just kind of to define it in another way, maybe just a different take on it. So I think we heard earlier that agents is equals to LLM plus kind of memory, plus data and kind of prompting. Another way of looking at it is effectively it's just a system that's able to use tools, usually APIs, and some kind of memory to perform tasks. And it's the performing tasks part that's really important, because this is how the progression in AI is going to happen over the next year or so. So agentic AI normally falls into two approaches, and I've taken this from Anthropic. So for those of you kind of starting out on this journey, it's useful to think about agentic AI in these two ways. So there's agentic workflows, which are normally fixed. So there's an idea around what the input should be. There's a model at the beginning, which kind of tries to understand what the user's trying to do, and then it routes it to other LLMs, and then there's an output. So those are normally like fixed workflows. They're cheaper to start with, easier to conceptualize, and it's also easy as well to talk through a stakeholder about a workflow, which is different to kind of a black box AI chatbot or kind of machine learning based AI for those familiar, because you can actually have a conversation about what goes in and what comes out. And then there's kind of full-blown agents which just keep on looping until they think the job is done. So the autonomy here, like you give more autonomy to the tool here compared to the workflows. But yeah, things like the coding agents, which we've heard about, are basically these agents that just keep looping until they think they've created that code, for example. So it's useful, at least internally in our team, we've found this distinction helpful. So some of the tools are workflows, some of them are full-blown agents. You can have the hybrid of the two as well, which is a multi-agent workflow. But we'll come on to that. So just in terms of like where this has come from, where this is laddering to. So we've heard a bit about this already today, but it's kind of 3 years ago, almost to the day, where the ChatGPT 3.5 came into public consciousness, and then we had this scaling and kind of maturity curve that these models went on. Then they became multimodal, and again they scaled, became bigger, became enterprise ready pretty quickly afterwards. And now where we are is kind of the first proper agent-based frameworks have come on the scene this year. So there's many of them, Crew AI, AutoGen, there's lots of them. I think the uncontroversial prediction is that this will become the important way to use LLMs to either replace or complement enterprise workflows in the next year. And then we don't really know, but I don't think anyone knows where we'll go after that, but there are these things called virtual worlds. So for those familiar with Google's Genie model, for example, they can simulate a world just through prompting, and that means you can probably use an agent to undertake tasks that you wouldn't have to do in the physical world. So, for example, coming up with some packaging testing and concept testing around that. So yeah, that's where we are, and I think that's pretty uncontroversial. But yeah, agents aren't really the solution to everything, at least in our opinion. So these are some example user stories that colleagues at Strat7 have kind of articulated to either the lab or other teams in Strat7. So just kind of throwing an agent at anything doesn't really seem to be the right solution in our opinion. So there are tasks in the market research world which, a LLM or just even automation would be suitable for. But as the tasks become more about kind of interpretation or creativity and search and synthesizing, that's where you need to think about how do you stitch together LLMs together, either in a workflow or using kind of full-blown agents. So we're going to focus on this use case. This is an actual tool we've been building over the last 6 months based on user demand really within Strat7. And then we'll talk about some tangible lessons which hopefully should be useful for anyone building similar tools in the room. So yeah, we built a tool called CrowdTracks, and yeah, the value proposition is creating a report in 5 minutes. So this tool is all about 3 agents working together. So this is a multi-agent workflow, if we're being super technical about it. So the agents work together, and the user kind of asks what they want in the setup phase. The planning agent comes up with the plan that the user can kind of brainstorm with and change, amend, brainstorm with. The signals agent goes onto the public web and finds the sources, interprets it, and then the narrative agent comes up with the report, which in our case is normally kind of PowerPoint and Word files. So I've got a demo which hopefully will run, and I will be able to talk through it to bring it to life. So this is a work in progress tool that we have internally. So all Strat7 staff have access to it. So I've chosen a prompt that should be quite topical around the future of in-person conferences over the next 5 years. Obviously, you can make the prompt as detailed or as short as you want. And I've, just for illustration, included some kind of buzzwords or cliches which may not be that useful in a report. So when you click Generate Outline, it normally takes about a minute and a half. I've abridged it just for the demo. But there's a language model which we've worked really closely with cultural experts at Strat7 to come up with the plan that they normally think about when creating a trends report. And then as a user, you can scroll through the plan and see the topics and the trends and a small description. And then it's up to you what you want to do. So you can remove, for example, this section, or you could give it more input. You can loop as many times as you want. And then after 5 minutes or so, the report is generated. So this is a first version report with kind of full source attribution on all of the signals. And again, we've worked closely with researchers to kind of produce it in this format. And then the narrative agent is skilled at taking what's a really kind of dense report, if you want to read it in all its detail, and kind of create a standard deliverable, which in our case is a Strat7 branded template. So there's a mind map that you can kind of see the bird's eye view, and then it kind of has this format of trend, micro-trend signal, which is the exact taxonomy that cultural researchers use at Strat7. That's the PowerPoint version. Here's basically the Word version. And this is the full attribution of all the sources with some metadata tags on whether the signal is strong, emergent, niche, or mainstream. Again, these are all terminologies that people use within Strat7. So it's basically a deep researcher, for those of you that have used deep research tools, but kind of 10x'd, if you like. So just to kind of delve a little bit deeper for those interested. So everything's based on the user prompts, and then there's kind of 3 layers to it. So there's the kind of the agentic layer, there's the tool layer, and the LLM layer. And you can build most tools like this using these three components. So yeah, what you saw there was basically the agent spine layer. So 3 agents working together, human in the loop here. But the good thing about this is that we can add other agents in the future. So one thing that we are kind of working on right now is how do you eliminate the kind of AI slot potentially on the internet that the signals agent is picking up, because that could be a risk. We don't really want the signals agent to be pulling in AI generated content, which is just generic stuff, and then the narrative agent is just generating stuff that's just all unnecessary information. So you can think of the agent layer as like a canvas that we can build additional agents on top, and we can put this in front of people who are not developers and get them to think about what agents should we create on top to expand the scope of it. And then obviously the agents have access to tools and user memory to execute their tasks. And then we're using an LLM, just like everyone else is obviously. But the key thing is that it's not actually about the LLM or even the tools, it's about actually the middle layer. So how you orchestrate those agents and how you add to them and improve them is the key thing. So yeah, this is a practical example of something we built. Now it looks, probably relatively easy and seamless, but actually been a lot of learnings, which are, I think, quite general learnings. So hopefully they're useful for everyone else. Yeah, so the report length, which you probably would have seen anyway, it can be very long and verbose. So the natural tendency for these tools is to produce probably too much content for people to get their head around. So we've had to create different types of outputs for different people. So we didn't have it in this demo, but a recent feature was like a one-pager, which is just like a standard, very condensed version of the report, and then you have different versions for different people. But yeah, I think the default is that these reports can be too long, and you need to kind of work against that in the underlying prompting. For those of you eagle-eyed, you would have probably spotted that there's no images in those outputs. The reason being is that we did experiment, but we think that AI right now it doesn't really understand how to piece together the written output with an image that kind of represents that signal, for example. So that's more of a human task. The sources are really important. That's central to the tool. So we don't just rely on one source, one tool provider. We've got more than one. So I definitely encourage people to not be over-reliant on one, in this case, one API provider to extract information from the web. Use more than one because you're covering more bases. And then finally, something we'll come on to in a couple of minutes is confidence scoring. I think this is something that, is kind of massively underexplored everywhere. How can we be confident that the computer's given us the right answer? And the answer is really for it to give a confidence score. But yeah, more on this in a minute. So those are learnings on the kind of build. We've also learned a lot as well about how do you actually get people to use these tools. So in a company of almost 400 people, there's a big job to be done to not just build something that sits on a shelf and isn't used. That has been a problem before. So we've gone down the route of what we call differentiation and empowerment. So we avoid the implementation trap of kind of just building something and hoping people will come. So differentiation is basically just creating pull factors. How do we create a tool that people get excited about? And although we want people to use the off-the-shelf tools, properly and with the right safeguards, because obviously we're handling client data. So it goes without saying that we're using enterprise-grade security, which means that the prompts and the data don't get sent over to third parties for retraining. There's full transparency over the sources, so hopefully you would have kind of seen that from the demo. So every single source has full attribution. Doesn't mean that source is necessarily good, but it does mean that you can check it. The planning agent is really important, so you don't get the report until you're happy with the plan. So that's critical. And then we've been building custom features as well. So, for example, having a report in like UK English, British English, instead of the Americanized version that always tends to come out. Building those small things that really makes people's lives better has been, critical. And then, empowering, not replacing. So, there's been some questions and references today about how do we reinvent our roles to feel like we are owning the process rather than being replaced. So we've co-created the prompts behind the agents with researchers. So although it's engineers building the tools, we haven't just asserted what those prompts should be, and they are quite long, and they do bake in lots of years of understanding what a trends report looks like. So we haven't taken that for granted, and we've co-created them. The tool is fully end-to-end, so you don't have to go out of the tool and copy and paste stuff from one tool into another. You get the polished output at the end. Obviously, you need to check that and edit it and modify it, but it is end-to-end. And then we've placed limits on the agentic behavior. So, the technology exists, as we've seen today, to do some quite wild things. For example, you could have the PowerPoint emailed to your client straight away as a button at the end. But we've obviously never going to do that as a company. So, we've employed the technology in a safe way. Okay, so what's next? What's next is basically confidence scoring. Our point of view on this is that there are two schools of thought almost on how to do this. So one is, can we get scores which kind of scan the AI responses in real time, which alerts users to how reliable the reports or the responses are? And then there's an offline component, which is monitoring model responses against ground truth. I think both of these are important to come up with a way of strengthening confidence in these tools. So we don't actually think confidence score is like a binary thing, like a score from 0 to 100, where you get one LLM to answer another LLM's response. We don't think that's the answer. We think the answer is more like a funnel. So this is something you're still looking at and kind of thinking about. But it's kind of breaking it down into what are the different parts of what a good quality or a poor quality response would be in the context of an agentic tool. So at the top of the funnel are things like relevance and faithfulness, which are really important to users and clients. So the relevance part probably is an LLM checking an LLM's output, but it's more focused on just the relevance rather than just evaluate the score blindly. The faithfulness part is more about the retrieval. So for those familiar with RAG, this is about, is the response in the report faithfully kind of pulling on the content that has been extracted. So it's checking whether the outputs are faithful. And then as you work your way down the funnel, there are still important aspects to check, but probably less mission critical. We think of it more as like a funnel or like different scores that make up maybe a composite score, but not a single binary thing that you can just kind of slap on at the end and just hope for the best. And then the other component is offline tracking, offline confidence scoring. So here it's possible and probably recommended to have some ground truth. And by that we mean, you take some prompts and you have a human-generated set of responses. And then when you make changes to the application, you have full traceability. So for those of you who are more familiar with kind of machine learning, this is basically MLOps, as it's called. So when you have a model that predicts fraud, for example, a mature system is able to tell you if retraining the model or changing anything in your system is more likely to increase or decrease accuracy. So this is now called LLM ops in the literature. So instead of blindly upgrading your model from GPT-4 to 5 or Claude 4 to 4.5 and hoping for the best, you can actually prove to people that, the accuracy is as high as it was before. So this is what we're now working on in tools like CrowdTrax. So if people ask us, where's your evidence that it's as good as it was 6 months ago? Then, we have that. So yeah, what our view is that the future is very much related to confidence and being able to tell the difference between a poor quality report and a high quality one. So yeah, that's it really from my side. Any questions?
Any questions? I've been this way before.
Thank you. It was a great presentation, and I want to talk about your last slide and the fact that you need testing.
Yeah.
It is incredibly hard to do unit testing with LLMs because the response is random. And of course you change model. How do you do that? How do you make sure that how can you create unit testing that works with LLM? That's my question.
Yeah, it is a complex area. I think I don't think it's possible to replicate the testing in a non-LLM system with where everything's deterministic, but there are ways to break it down. So I think the tool that we showed here today is probably not the best example of this, but if you have more of a regular chatbot, which has retrieval search in it, what we try to do is work with people who really know the subject matter so that we can compare the responses to example prompts to what people think the answer should be. So then we have that gold standard test set almost that we can always keep referring back to. But yeah, the whole software delivery of these tools, including unit testing, which I think you said, with LLMs is tricky. And there's a whole ecosystem that will no doubt emerge to handle this, but it doesn't exist right now. So it is a challenge, yeah.
I just have a specific question about the CrowdTrack tool.
Sure.
Is there anything in place to check for stereotyping or out-of-date information?
Yeah, so in the I simplified the agent diagram, but there is a mini agent between the signals and the narrative, which is checking for stereotyping, protected characteristics, that type of thing. But we want to strengthen that as much as possible because there's a lot of information to digest as a user of the tool. So it is there behind the scenes, but that does that. But then we want to kind of almost augment that, so it's like an anti-slop agent, and we can give it these things other names, but basically checking to make sure as one agent passes off to the other, that you're right, it's as robust as possible. Yeah.
Thank you. I really like your architectural diagram. So I have seen even this session we discussed a lot about prompting, and we discussed a lot about LLMs. But I see we hardly talk about the middle part, the knowledge base, the embedding model we select, the type of the vector database, vector indexing, might be synthetic search or some other. So what is your opinion if we take those three components, prompting, KBs, and LLMs, so to make agent or persona or other tools to enrich personas, how important we take care our KBs?
Yeah, I think my view is of those three things, the prompting is the most important, personally. I think the knowledge bases are important, and we've had talks today that data is central. And obviously data is unique to each organization, and that's what separates company A from company B at the end of the day. But yeah, the LLMs, I wouldn't say they're fully commoditized, but they're very similar now in their capabilities. So yeah, the way to build and architect these tools is to think carefully about the prompting, where one agent hands off to the other, and then the knowledge they have access to. And then, in our experience, the best prompts are ones that actually data engineers are not necessarily fully in control of. They work together with people who know the subject matter, and you build that into the system prompt behind the scenes. So yeah, it's a combination of prompting which isn't just what the developers and the engineers think is best, and then the knowledge, the kind of secret source is the knowledge bases. But then, yeah, in order to kind of prove that your system is working as effectively as possible, this kind of LLM ops, if you like, is going to become really important, I think, because otherwise you'll just kind of trust blindly that upgrading the model and giving it more data is always going to improve it. But that's not actually always the case, right? So this kind of gives you full visibility.
Okay, I think we're done. Thank you very much,
thank you.
Hasdeep.